1. When I was 18, about a year and a half ago, I was laying on my stomach on my bed playing my 3DS. All my lights were on and I was gearing up to set my game aside to actually go to sleep. Before I did, though, I started to hear this horrible sobbing. It was the saddest, most gut-wrenching sound I'd ever heard. Sounded like a man just completely losing it, forgetting all the emotional training he'd had in his life, and just letting it all go. It was like a high-pitched male howling and crying. It was so painful just to listen to it. I immediately thought that it was my dad. He sleeps just above me, separate room from my mother due to his snoring, and my grandfather has been really sick for years. I figured that my grandpa had passed. I didn't think much of ghosts or anything, and just left my room, went up the stairs, and woke my mother up. By the point I had left the room, the sobbing had stopped, and when I passed by my dad's room to tell my mom, I couldn't hear crying anymore. Again, I didn't think anything of it for whatever reason, and I just figured he was gaining control of himself. I woke my mom up and told her, I think Grandpa died. She got this look on her face like, oh shit, and got up. I thought I was emotionally gearing up for the death of a family member, so I left her to it and started just messing around the kitchen to get a drink to keep myself busy. I heard my mom go into my dad's room and could hear him go, I got this kind of feeling in my gut that said he was asleep, and I started to shake. But I just brushed it off as me reading too many unsolved mystery stories. My mom came out after a little bit and looked at me really quizzically. Everything's okay, she said. He was asleep. I started to shake and cry immediately. I was shaking so bad I couldn't actually stand, and my mother had to come over and hold me up. I knew exactly what I had heard, and I was also letting go of all this emotional energy that I had been penning up at once. It took quite a while for her to calm me down and get me to stop crying. I don't remember feeling scared or full of adrenaline, but I remember crying and shaking. My memory is hazy after that. I actually think I went down to my bed and to sleep without much issue. I don't know why it didn't bother me more at the time. My dad said he had left on a World War II documentary and insisted it was just that. Only issue I have is that I have slept under him since I was 11, and he usually falls asleep in the middle of some documentary or other. I only occasionally hear his movies through the ground, and it's always been kinda quiet. Nothing I have ever heard has been that loud and that clear. Looking back on it, it sounded more like it was in my room than coming from the floor above, let alone on that night. None of the other noises that might have been the documentary made it through the floorboards that night. My mom joked it was his snoring, but we run into the exact same issues. Some of the people I've told say it was sleep paralysis or just plain old dreaming. For one, I've experienced sleep paralysis before, and every single one has been purely auditory for me, meaning that my eyes cannot be open at the same time. I've yet to come across an exception, so the fact that my eyes were open and I was playing a game at the time kinda wipes out that idea to me. Also again, I wasn't even properly laying down and my lights weren't off. I wasn't even sleeping, really. So I definitely wasn't sleepy enough to just fall asleep in that position. During the same week, I was home alone with my dog in my lap. I was sitting on the couch upstairs, facing away from the stairway. I heard someone running up and down about 4 steps at the top, really deliberately about 4 times. Again, I had this weird non-issue with it at the time. I didn't feel all that afraid, no adrenaline rush or anything. I did get up and grab a knife, but I still wasn't scared when I was doing it. It's only as I'm writing it that I realize how weird that sounds. Like I didn't feel scared at all, but my body went through the motions of being scared in both situations. Shaking, grabbing a knife, etc. The sound of the sobbing has always really stuck with me. It truly is the saddest sound I've ever heard, and I will never, ever forget it. I do go back and forth on whether it was a high-pitched male sobbing or a female. It being female is slightly more juicy, as we had a woman kill herself in our garage back in the 1950s, after a divorce, and we've joked about her haunting our house for years. But I think it was the male because of my immediate reaction to, oh, it's my dad. and I remember it sounded especially sad because it was like someone completely letting go of social norms. I have never had any more paranormal experiences in my house. It was just those two specific instances in a couple-day time span. I actually don't believe in the paranormal, but I also think it's stupid to believe there are things we can't explain. So these experiences have always been a weird middle ground for me. 2. So this started in November of 2013. At least that's when my friends and I first spotted it. I live in a 7-story apartment building, and every morning and evening, I would go out to play football or cricket with my other friends from the apartment. We'd play in the playground. It was just a wide gravel ground right below the building, and there was another apartment building under construction in the same compound as our building, because it was the same builder's company. Now this building, which was under construction, was in an elevated area right beside the building where I stayed, and no one other than the construction workers would really go there, because there was really no reason to. So one November evening, my friends and I were playing hide-and-seek or football, I can't quite remember. After a while of playing, we got bored and started roaming around the building grounds, chatting and laughing. We went towards the parking lot, which was behind the main building, and right next to it was the under-construction apartment building. We weren't looking at the building, just chilling and talking amongst ourselves. It was around 5 or 6 p.m. One of my friends suddenly spotted something and pointed it out to us. He pointed toward one of the apartment windows on the 2nd story of the building. My friends and I tried to look at what it was, and we all saw it. It seemed like a shadow, nothing else. It was just an extremely dark figure which looked like it had long hair or was wearing a hooded cloak. We couldn't tell what it was. We would just see it in a particular window on the 2nd story of the building. Sometimes it looked like it ducked out of sight and poked its head out again after a while. We could never clearly see what it looked like because, for some reason, we would only see it during the evening hours when we were playing together. It just stood there, probably looking at us. None of us were, however, creeped out by it. It seemed harmless. On the first day, my friends and I thought nothing much of it. We thought it was just a shadow or something. The next day, we knew we had to check if what we saw the previous day was still there, and sure enough it was. This time we were convinced there was something there. We all decided it was a ghost without giving it much thought. We were all 6th and 7th graders at the time, so anything to do with ghosts was fun, right? Now I'm going to write about 3 evidences we found that made me sure that there was definitely something in the building. Number 1. This was the 2nd day we saw the figure in the window. I, being really interested in the paranormal and having watched ghost hunting shows, told my friends that I was going to download a ghost detector app on my Android phone, as ghosts emit electromagnetic waves, and ghost detector apps can detect electromagnetic waves. These were my words to my friends. Kill me. They sure believed me on my words because we were all stupid at the time. I downloaded the app. Next day, when my friends and I went out to play, we directly went to the parking lot behind the building, because none of us were really there to play that day. I opened the ghost detector app in my phone, and even though I had said the app could detect electromagnetic waves, I was pretty sure it was not going to do anything, mainly because it was just a phone. So I opened the app, and a radar-like thing showed up with a scanner. It's like those radars that ships use. The figure was still standing there that day too, but we needed one more confirmation for its legitimacy from the stupid app in my phone. The app had an index that said a green blob on the radar was for a weak signal from the entity, and yellow for a fairly strong signal, and a red one for a very strong signal. To all of our disbelief, what do we see? A red blob pops up on the radar, and it's pointing directly at the window where the figure is standing. I don't know how it detected the figure there, or if it was just a coincidence. If it was a coincidence, it was a hella freaky one, but we all saw it on the radar. That was the first time we all got scared, knowing that something that was not human was definitely there. We all ran back to our homes that day because all of us were scared. After that day, we would continue observing the figure, and it always just stood there and sometimes ducked and then stood up again. That was the routine. We didn't know what to do about it. We did not tell our parents about it, but we did ask one of the construction workers about it, and he said that one of the older mason's daughters had died in the building. I don't know if he was just joking with us because we were impressionable kids. Now for the second evidence, just to let you know, there were many other smaller experiences we had with it, but I'm just talking about the major three here. Number 2. This happened in January 2014. One day, 3 of my friends from school came over. I told them about the whole business with the ghost my friends from the apartment and I had seen, and our proof that it existed, with the whole ghost detector app incident. My friends from school suggested we go look for the ghost there, and who was I to refuse? I loved the idea of ghost hunting, as long as it was during daytime because ghosts only show up during the dark, right? So I led my 3 friends to the under-construction building, and there were no workers there that day. Since it was the same compound as the main building, there was no wall or anything between the 2 buildings. We went into the building, and my friends and I went into the exact room, through the window of which we saw the figure every night. It was my first time in that place. I was standing exactly where the figure would stand every night, and there was nothing there. My friends started joking about the ghost, saying things like, "Hey, you stupid ghost, suck my dick," and "Maybe the ghost got scared of us and ran away." When, right less than a second after they said that, a pile of wood stacks fell from, I believe, the top of the building, and slammed down on the ground very loudly. Why would a worker throw a pile of wood like that from the top of the building? Besides, there were no workers there that day. My friends and I were scared shitless and ran away. That day, after my friends left and when evening time came, my friends from the building and I went out to play, and I told them about the incident in the morning. Number 3. This was in April of 2017. I left the old building in 2014 and moved to a new apartment building less than a kilometer away from my old one. One day I'm jamming and practicing with my band for an upcoming band competition, and since we were jamming for like 4 hours straight, we got super bored. We decided to go out for a walk. I suddenly remembered about my old apartment's ghost and told them about it and suggested that we all go there and look for it if it's still there. My band and I walked to my old building and saw that the way to the under-construction building had been blocked, and all that construction work on the building was discontinued for some reason. I knew a way towards the back of the under-construction building, but it was out of the compound, so we wouldn't get to go into the building. We'd just be able to see it from the outside. I led my friends through the way up a short sloping road, which led to a small mud alley, which gave a view of the back of the under-construction building. We could not see the actual front window through which we'd always see the figure standing, but we could see through the other second-story windows. It was evening time. One of my bandmates said that he'd take a picture of all the second-story windows visible to us, to see if anything pops up in the camera. So he took a picture of the 2 windows that were visible. One of the windows belonged to the apartment we'd seen the figure in. It was evening time, and since all construction work had been stopped in the building, there were no lights or anything switched on. My bandmate clicked the pictures and we huddled around his phone to see if we saw anything in the pictures. Interestingly, there was an orb of light in the apartment we saw the figure in. There was nothing in the other window. We looked at the window again and saw that there was nothing there. But in the picture, there was clearly an orb of light in the window. To this day, I haven't been able to make anything of it, but there was definitely something there in that building. 3. I've always been into the paranormal world. Ever since I was a little kid, one of my favorite things to do was watching horror movies or paranormal TV shows. I used to get scared very, very easily, but that didn't matter to me. I guess I just liked feeling the adrenaline in my body, until I got legit goosebumps. Luckily, or not, 2 years ago I went through a lot of personal stuff and I stopped being frightened of everything involving paranormal stuff, and sorts of that matter. And since I've always loved that kind of thing and I wasn't scared anymore, I started watching, hearing and reading paranormal stuff at all times, like literally all day, every day. Before I stopped being frightened, I had already experienced some paranormal stuff through the years, and maybe I was just too scared to admit or openly talk about it. Maybe I'll start writing about them as well. But I wanted to start with this particular experience. Since I had been too involved in paranormal stuff for the last 2 years, I guess I attracted all sorts of energy, but mostly bad energy, and worse things, experiences started happening to me. I know that the more you're involved, the more vulnerable you get. This happened 2 months ago. I was in San Diego with 3 of my closest friends, because we were attending a concert, so we booked a hotel room for that matter. The night before the show, we were all pretty tired and we wanted to sleep in early, so we could rest as much as we could for the show. So I went to sleep in the same bed as my best friend, and in the other bed, a nightstand separated them, were my 2 other friends. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, and in the corner of my room, I saw this big black figure that was staring at me, directly in the eye, and I sensed this super heavy, dark, and bad energy around the room. I knew there was something wrong. At this point, the energy was so fucking bad that I knew I was in front of a demon himself. My best friend woke up, and she was really confused because I grabbed her arm and squeezed it so hard she started hurting. I don't recall this act. And she told me to calm down and stop accusing her of things she didn't do. She told me I was telling her to stop staring at me and scaring me, to just let me sleep. I don't recall telling her any of that. The only thing I remember was seeing the demon in the room instead, and it was staring right into my eyes. After all the confusion and shouting, we calmed down and got back to bed. At this point, none of the other 2 friends had woken up. They were sleeping deeply. I was very scared. I think I've never been more scared in my life. But I really didn't want to scare her by telling her I'd just seen a demon. So I let her go back to sleep. After a few minutes, I started telling myself to not let him get to me and that I wasn't scared anymore, so he couldn't feed off my fear and he could go away. I know for a fact that if you build up a wall in your mind and don't let it get to you, it really won't, and it will go away. So I did that with all the energy I had left. But as I was telling all that to myself, I sensed a second wave of super heavy, dark, and bad energy, if you can call it that way, and the energy was going towards one of my 2 other friends who were sleeping, the one who was just across the nightstand. And I knew this demon had something to do with her. I don't even know how, I just knew, and their connection was so strong that just looking at her made me really uncomfortable and scared. A few minutes went by and I repeated to myself the things I said before, and I tried to build a bigger wall in my head. And I did, and eventually it went away, and I went back to sleep. The morning after, we were getting ready to go to the concert, and I started talking to my best friend about the night before, and I told her and my 2 other friends that I had seen a demon, and before I got into details about what I had experienced, the friend with the connection with the demon approached me and told me right in the eye that what I had experienced was because of her, that she had a demon with her and sometimes it manifested, and that she was so sorry about it, and that I shouldn't be afraid of it, that she wasn't afraid anymore since she'd dealt with it for years. The craziest thing about this experience is that I didn't tell her or anybody, at that point, that I knew they had a connection. I still can't explain how I knew or sensed a connection between them, the demon and my friend, but the thing I knew is that it was very strong. Later she told us that since she was 12 years old, she played the Ouija board by herself, and thinks the demon followed her since then. 4. Background. I was living in my hometown at the time, very small town. Everyone knew everyone and what you were doing. Typical small town. Anyways, I had just turned 18 and moved out of my mom's house with a close friend. Since we didn't have a whole lot of stuff to do in our small town, we found other sources of entertainment. My close friend was the one who mentioned playing with a Ouija board, and we had done it countless times and nothing crazy really ever happened. We played at graveyards at 3 a.m., abandoned buildings, famous haunted places everyone talked about. Nothing really scared us. We never closed the conversation or used any crystals or prayers to protect us. We definitely egged things on, challenged and taunted whatever or whoever was there. One night, we had a close mutual friend at our apartment. We were hanging out in our living room. The kitchen and living room was separated only by a wall with a small doorway on both sides. We were trying to convince him to play, but he refused. The piece kept pointing in his direction and sliding off the board, which, supposedly, lets the spirit escape into the room. It never answered any questions or did anything other than spiral out of control, like literally flying out from under our fingers, or point at him and slide off the board in his direction. We took this as whatever it was it wanted, we'll call him Bob, to play the game. After about an hour of this, I got frustrated and took my hands off after it slid its way off the board, pointing at Bob. I looked at my friend, we'll call her Jane, and said, "I just want something to fucking happen." Almost as those words left my mouth, we heard a slamming in the kitchen. We all looked at each other and Bob said, "Please tell me you have a cat." You could hear his voice crack with fear. Jane, who I was facing, grabbed my leg, staring directly at me. She didn't or couldn't say a word. I have never seen anyone more terrified in my entire life. The room was lit only by a small candle. My instincts took over, and I turned the flashlight on my phone and screamed as I stood up, flipped around, and shone my flashlight in the direction she was facing. Nothing was there. Jane's eyes were filled with tears, and Bob, who is a pretty tough larger guy, was basically crying. We flipped the lights on, searched the apartment, and found nothing. Keep in mind, we had a small 2-bed, 1-bath, with a small laundry room attached to the kitchen apartment, with only one entrance since we lived in the top floor. No pets, no explanation. The next day, it's around 4 p.m. and Jane and I were sitting in our rooms, relaxing after work. It was light outside and had been a normal day. Suddenly I heard the creak of a cupboard open, and seconds later, loud slamming and glass breaking. After what seemed like hours, the sound stopped. I assumed Jane was in the kitchen and dropped something. I yelled, "Are you okay? What the hell just happened?" No response. I got up off my bed and started walking down the hall, only to find that Jane was sitting in her room with her mouth open, looking at me with probably the same face I was looking at her with. I scurried into her room and sat next to her. After several minutes of silence, we decided to go check it out. As we were walking down the hallway, we heard the crushing of glass like somebody was walking across it. We just looked at each other and kept walking. The crunching stopped as soon as we reached the kitchen. There was glass everywhere, from the spot where the dishes had fallen and slammed to the floor, into the living room, reaching the door, under the door to the laundry room, and all the way to the other side of the kitchen. We were standing there in complete shock. These were Jane's nice dishes, placed carefully on the top shelf, where they had been sitting for several months. The glass was not just broken, it was completely shattered. We found tiny slivers of glass the remaining time we lived there. Frustrated and confused, we grabbed the board and immediately asked, "Did you break the dishes?" Answered with an immediate yes. The piece moved off the yes and back on like it was proud and obviously wanted to scare us, and then took the stupid piece of cardboard out to the small parking lot and tried to burn it. I say tried because it wouldn't really catch fire, just burn. And for being a piece of cardboard, I found this really strange. So I broke it into small pieces and tossed it into the dumpster, and no, it did not return, so that's not real. Strange things happened after that until the day we moved out. I feel bad for the people who live there now. We unleashed something, and I think her name is Sophie. That's a whole different story. I hope to never return to this place. I also have lots of other strange encounters in that apartment, and throughout my lifetime. Being a skeptic and pretty damn fearless, I really have no answers or explanations. I often get called a liar when I tell this story, but I don't care. I know what I saw, felt, and experienced. There is something beyond our understanding. 5. Just as a preface, I believe in ghosts and the unexplained. I believe a lot of what I am about to write about is symptoms of sleep paralysis. I have had it once before, but this time the experience is literally in the back of my head, on and off every day for the last month. Here we go. I have a cabin in the north woods of Minnesota, located about 15 miles inland from Grand Marais, Minnesota, so basically Canada, and about as old of a forest as you can be in. I have been going to this cabin for 22 years. We built it from the ground up with our own hands. The front half of our property is without a doubt my family's. However, we have a back lot that is about 10 acres and breaks up into the Superior National Forest. I have not done a lot of exploring back there. We mostly use it to preserve the land and to pile trees that fall into the road. I decided to check it out with my wife and dog. I don't know if this next bit is related to what happened, but it is the first time I have really explored our backlot, and really the only thing that stands out. We started on the road, right at the top of my driveway, and I get our bearing. We walk without incident for about 2 hours. Considering we were bushwhacking with a machete, it was pretty grueling work, as anyone who has trailblazed can tell you. We stop in an area that has what I like to call fairy mounds, not because I believe in fairies, but because it is a pile of dirt or rotted plants that have been completely covered by moss and look super smooth and kinda out of place. They are super bright green, and there are quite a few of them deep in the forest. After the 2 hours of walking, our dog yelps and starts biting at the air all around her. We figure she got into a beehive in the ground, so we decided that was a good time to turn around. I did not see any bees, but my wife says she saw a couple. As the day progresses, I keep hearing footsteps in our main lot, in the same set of trees on the southwest corner by our well. We have many animals, including bear, lynx, wolves, deer, etc., so I dismiss it as nothing. But the hair stands up on end, and I listen to my basic prey instinct, and figure it's some sort of predator. Fast forward to that night. I still cannot shake the feeling of being watched by a predator. It is now pitch black out, and our dog keeps trying to go outside. But every time she does, she acts weird and doesn't leave the light circle cast by our floodlights. She keeps begging to be let out. I have seen this before, and it happened to my old dog when a pack of wolves were on our land, trying to lure the dog out to be ganged up on. So I lock up the dog door and grab my gun. I cannot reiterate enough how unsettled I feel. I have been on this land for almost 3 decades. I have slept under the stars, hunted in the trees, and hiked without a flashlight for miles because I know the paths so well. This night, however, the forest felt like a stranger. For the first time in my life, I do not feel welcome in my own land. It felt menacing. So I decide to go to bed and just sleep it off. It is very late. My wife is watching a movie and had a soda after 5 p.m., so like any 30-year-old, she can't sleep yet. Incoming sleep paralysis. I am laying in bed, on my side, my arm under my ear. I can feel my body start to get heavy, but I can hear my heart beat in my arm like a drum beat. Boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden I realize I can't move at all. My heart speeds up. Boom, boom, boom. I try to wiggle my fingers and can only get them to wiggle very slightly. And I know for a fact at that moment I was in sleep paralysis. So I know what this comes with. Paralysis, intruders, waking dreams. Holy shit, I still think about it. I see my dog walk into the room. At least I think it's my dog. I can only see the shadow close to the ground, and I can't turn my head. So I try to call her name. I can't make my mouth work. I try to call her on my bed. Maybe the jostling will wake me up. So I lamely pat my bed with a limp hand. A no-go. My heart still beating in my head louder and louder, but is comforting for some reason. Bum, bum, bum. I see my wife walk into the room. She sits on the bed. I beg her, please wake me up. It comes out so soft I can barely hear myself. I ask for water. She doesn't move. I try shouting, just wake me up! But it comes out no louder than a murmur. As I look at her, I realize I did not feel her actually sit on the bed. I look at her face and realize it's just a shadow. And why hasn't she moved since she got into the room? Bump, bump, bump. She's not my wife. Okay, that's weird. Never hear of an intruder being a person before. So I look away. My eyes glancing around the room, I am frantically wiggling my toes and fingers, trying anything to get my goddamn body to do one thing I tell it to. Just do it! Bump, 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 bump. My heart sounds like one solid beat now. I look up and see black. In the middle of the room there is an absolute blank circle, a spot in the room devoid of anything. I feel like I am being pulled to it. The spot keeps getting bigger and bigger. Then all at once, with my heart thundering in my ears, it's over. I get control of my body. I look around disorientated. I look down. No dog. I walk out to the living area. My wife is there. I ask her if her or the dog came into the room and she says no. And apparently I was in bed for about an hour. I check the clock. It's 3:07 a.m. My dog is sleeping on the couch. The feeling is gone. I talk to my wife about it, and she thinks it was just a nightmare created by freaking myself out. I tell her I think we ran into a wood spirit of some kind, or just a really freaky dream. I still don't know. I have had unexplained happen to me before, but this felt so close. I have no other descriptions for it. Thanks for hearing me out. This is really more therapeutic for me at this point. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 101. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Also like to say big thanks to everybody for leaving comments, likes, for sharing it on last week's episode 100. You were all very kind, and it always feels good to reach those milestones. A plus side is, now that the pressure, the self-imposed pressure and all the stress of trying to get that in the Q&A organised, I can now begin work on the pressure and stress of trying to clear out a week's worth of videos so that I can take off the 19th, the week of the 19th, so that'll be from the 17th through, because that's the week of my birthday. And I want to be able to have a nice relaxing time. So, not this week. I'm going to just have a relatively normal week for the rest of the week. But next week is basically going to be pulling double duty. And if I do that, then I'll be able to take the following week off. Okay. And with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening. And take very good care of yourselves.